The Serpent King, and I'd like to introduce Lauren. Lauren, do you want to say something about yourself?
Sure, I'm Lauren Mertz, and I'm an MSTA member, and I'm really excited. I read The Serpent King, and I can't wait to talk to Jeff about it.
All right. I have listened to it twice and read it once. That's how much I love the book.
Wow,
and I've also
thank you.
read Goodbye Days, and I love that one too. So I am very excited. You're just like my hero right now. So
music to my
I'm
ears.
just really
Thank
excited.
you.
So, and Jeff, would you like to introduce yourself and say something about your book?
Sure. I'm Jeff Zentner. I'm the author of The Serpent King, which came out in 2016 and is about 3 misfit teenagers growing up in a small town in rural Tennessee and coming of age and coming to grips with the end of high school and them going their separate ways, and you know, trying to find their way into a bright future. My second book, Goodbye Days, came out in 2017. That's about a young man who's struggling with grief and guilt after an accident that killed his 3 best friends, which he may have caused by texting them while they were driving. And so it's all about his journey through grief and guilt and therapy and all of those travails. And while all that's going on, the families of his friends invite him to spend goodbye days with them, where they have sort of a day of remembrance, where they do all the things with the deceased loved one that they would have done if they'd had the chance before they died.
All right. I'm going to start off because I have a question for you. Which character was the easiest for you to write about in The Serpent King?
So this will sound like a cop out, but I promise there's a good explanation. They were equally easy to write because I divided my personality into thirds, and I gave each one of the 3 characters a third of my personality to hold. So Dill has a third of my personality. He's got kind of my, I guess, sort of the way I view the world, the way I find beauty and broken and rusted things, his love for music, his struggles with faith, that's all mine. Lydia's kind of got my curiosity, my sense of humor is very Lydia's ambition. And then Travis has my imagination, my nerdiness over the things that I love. So each one of them were equally easy to write in their own way.
Okay. Lauren, do you have anything you want to just pop in anytime?
Okay, I'm just curious where the original idea for the book came from.
For The Serpent King?
Yes.
So I wrote that as I was transitioning from being a musician. And as kind of a way of cheating and getting a head start, I got the idea for the book from a couple of songs that I'd written. One song, I didn't know it at the time, but as I wrote the book, I discovered this was from Dill's perspective. It's about a young man reflecting on the confines of his small town. And then the other song is called The Serpent King, and it's this kind of dark Appalachian-style ballad about who I now know as Dill's grandfather. So I had put those 2 songs, I had those 2 songs, and I thought either would make an interesting novel, but I didn't know which one I wanted to base a novel on. So I decided not to choose. I decided I would use both of them and somehow find a connection between those 2 songs.
Okay. Why did you choose Tennessee as your setting for your story?
It's a place I know. I mean, I've lived in Tennessee for most of my life. It's a beautiful place. It's a place that I think deserves stories. So that's why Tennessee.
I totally agree. I think there's not a lot of young adult books about several states, or,
Yep.
you know, that they always take place in the cities.
Yep.
So that was nice to see. I found like lots of great quotes throughout the whole book. Is there a quote that you like, one of the best ones?
So there is the quote, if you're going to live, you might as well do painful, brave, and beautiful things. That's a quote people seem to really like a lot and identify with a lot. And I certainly like that quote a lot. I like there's a part in the book where I say, nothing makes you feel as naked as somebody identifying a desire you never knew you possessed. I like that quote too. But I think mainly the first one. I think that one really sums up the way I was feeling when I wrote the book, because it was scary for me to transition from music into writing. I haven't really had any creative writing classes in my life. I'd read a lot of books, but I didn't really know anything about writing a novel. And so it was frightening to leave something behind like music and start doing something like writing books.
That would be very scary.
So where did you find the bravery to really make that jump?
It was, so as a musician, I had started to volunteer at a music camp for teenagers, a summer music camp called Tennessee Teen Rock Camp. And at this camp, I really just fell in love with the teenagers I was working with. I thought they were amazing. I loved the way that they approached the art they loved. I loved their spirit and their curiosity about life and their energy. I thought it was amazing. And I wanted to create art for that audience. But the problem was that I was too old to make the kind of art that I knew how to make, which was music. I was, in my mid-30s. That's too old to make the kind of music that gets marketed to young adults, unless you get a start on it, in your teens and 20s. So it was a matter of wanting to reach the audience I wanted to reach, and knowing that I had a limited amount of time to try to do that. So that's what gave me the courage to try, because it was either write books or nothing. I don't know what else I could have done to reach teenagers, take up juggling. I don't know.
Have you been surprised on all the awards you've gotten from Serpent King?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Everything about this book has surprised me. It surprised me that people in the publishing industry and, in their big skyscrapers in New York City were interested in a book that I think is a very quiet book about, these kids living these quiet, undistinguished lives in a quiet, undistinguished town. That really surprised me. And it surprised me, when the Serpent King started getting these recognitions, because there are many, many wonderful books out there. There's a lot of great books, especially in the year I published The Serpent King. There were a lot of great books that came out. So it definitely surprised me quite a bit. It was a very pleasant surprise.
I know when I read it, I'm a school librarian in a small town, and I could just picture so many of our kids could relate to if they were Dill or Lydia or Travis, and I could just picture them all the time throughout that whole story, whole book. And so
awesome.
That was, as soon as I got done, I was like, told all these other teachers, you have to read this because our kids are in this book.
Awesome.
So, but that has really been a great book for our kids.
Do you find that teenagers can see themselves in one character more than any other?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely hear from people who consider themselves Lydias, and I hear from people who consider themselves Dills, and I hear from a lot of teenagers who consider themselves Travises. Yeah. He seems to be the one that teenagers identify with the most. And, I think that is largely a function of the fact that he's a bookish teenager. He loves books. And so naturally, the kind of teenagers who read books, I think, are going to identify with that character quite a bit.
So, what are you working on now?
I like talking about this because I just finished the first draft of my new book called TV6. Okay. And it is it's a comedy, kind of a dramedy, I guess, but it leans. So whereas we're Goodbye Days and Serpent King, we're kind of a mix of 30% comedy to probably 70% dark and sad. TV6, I sought to flip that proportion. So it's kind of more 70% funny, 30% sad. There's still some sadness, and there's, life is hard for the kids in that book, but it is about two girls in Jackson, Tennessee, they have just graduated from high school, and they have a TV show on their local public access station where they show old horror movies, and they're what are called horror hosts. So they dress up like vampires, they have funny names, and they do skits in between, like as little interludes to the movie, kind of like Elvira. Is probably the most famous horror host that people know of, sort of like Elvira, Tales from the Crypt, that sort of thing. And so they do this show, and they have an opportunity to meet with this big Hollywood producer, and they think that that may be what allows them to keep doing their show and not have to go their separate ways to pursue their various goals. And it's about that. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. It surprised me in a lot of ways. It turned out to be kind of a deeper book than I had expected it would be, and that was a nice surprise.
So for this book, we won't have to have like a couple boxes of Kleenexes with us.
No.
Oh,
there were still parts in the book. There were still a few parts in the book that made me cry, and definitely there were parts in the Serpent King that made me cry, and those seem to be the same parts that made other people cry. So
right.
You may need a little bit, but there were a lot more parts that writing it made me laugh. So.
Oh, well, good. Because I had several teachers and students say, "You didn't tell me this was going to happen." I'm like, I couldn't. As I said, I listened to your Serpent King twice. Do you get to select your narrator, or do you have any say in that?
I actually had more say in that than I've had with any of the production aspects of my book in publishing generally. They came to me with Michael Crouch, who was the voice of Dill, and he's also the voice of Carver in Goodbye Days. And he is so great. It's funny, the last time I was in New York, I was at Random House waiting to meet with my editor, and I hear somebody go, "Jeff," and I'm like, I know that voice. And I turn, and it's Michael. It's the voice of Dylan Carver, and he's in the lobby, and he's there to record a book. So he and I got to meet. It was really fun. But I was telling him, I was like, man, my next book is going to be 2 girls, and I still want you to do it. So they brought me Michael and for Dill, and he was amazing. He was perfect. So I said, good. Then they brought me the guy for Travis, and he was perfect too. He was great. He sounded a little older than I had imagined Travis sounding, but because he had a lot of the old men voices in the book, like the guy Lamar who tells the story of the Serpent King to Travis, and particularly like Travis's dad, then I was great with it. Like I loved what he brought to their voices. So I was okay with Travis sounding a little older. Then the girl they initially had for Lydia wasn't quite right. Wasn't quite how I envisioned Lydia sounding. And so I just suggested somebody who my friend Carrie suggested to me, and they said, yeah, we can get her. So they got her.
The audiobook was really fantastic. I just really loved it.
Oh, thank you.
I've also listened to Goodbye Days too, and that was really good. When I turned it on, I could hear that voice, and I'm like, oh yes, this brings back memories.
Awesome.
I know a lot of authors have a certain place that they write or they do. Can you tell us a little bit about how you do that?
Yeah, I wrote about 70% of Goodbye Days in the Serpent King and TV6 on my phone on the bus to and from work.
Oh my gosh.
So
can I ask, just a regular phone?
Just regular phone. Yeah, just regular phone, just a regular iPhone. So I would just get it out and type with my right thumb. So I wrote most of my first 2 books with my right thumb. Now, for my 3rd book, I got myself a little tablet and a keyboard, and I used that for a while, but I eventually just fell back into using my phone again because it's what I know. It's my writing implement. It's funny, actually, the phone, sorry, I dropped my pen, that I wrote the Serpent King and Goodbye Days on, I ended up getting a new phone and retiring that phone. And so my son inherited that phone. And it was really funny. One night he was getting really mad. He was fussing at us. He didn't want to go to bed, and he threw the phone. And I go, sweetie, you can't throw that phone. That's Daddy's special phone that I wrote my books on. You can't throw that phone. And he just started crying, just weeping. He felt so sad about this. He's like, I'm sorry I threw your special phone, Daddy. I'm sorry. And the thing is, he's not usually like that. Like, he's pretty like unapologetic when he does things he does, which I guess is not my favorite thing, but also a good thing in some ways. But yeah, he was very apologetic about that. So I write mostly on my phone. Now, I just barely set up a bedroom in my house as a little writing office. And that's actually for my son and I. He uses it too because he writes his little books. He gets out papers and staples them together. He's 8, and he makes little comic books. So that's his and my writing office. So that's where I try to do a lot of writing now.
Well, I saw on Twitter you got your new chair. So is that the office area?
Okay. Yep. That's the office area.
Okay.
And it's been really nice to have. I like having a dedicated space for writing. It feels really good.
So go ahead, Laura.
How much do you write, or how long day do you dedicate to writing?
I was going to ask the same thing.
Well, so pure writing and editing, I would say generally not more than 2 hours a day. Generally, I'll do an hour during the day, like on the bus into work, a little over my lunch hour, come home, and I'll do a little at night. I try to do between 500 and 1,000 words a day. So Goodbye Days has 88,000 words. Serpent King has 77,000 words. TV6 has 83,000 words so far. So if you do 500 to 1,000 words a day, you end up with a book before long. And on the weekends, I'll try to do more. On the weekends, I'll try to do 3,000 or 4,000 words. So for me, it's not so much a matter of time, but a matter of the amount of words I can do, the amount of pages I can edit. And also, there's a lot of stuff that I consider part of my writing job that is not really writing per se. Like, I think about my characters. Like, I'll go on an hour-long walk and think about my characters, or a half-hour-long run and think about my characters. So I consider that writing time. When I'm blurbing someone else's book, I consider that writing time when I'm reading that book for a blurb. So a few hours a day. I have a day job, though. That's where I'm at right now. So I don't get to spend quite as much time with writing as if I were a full-time writer.
Do you edit on your phone also, or do you?
No, that I have to do on the computer. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You said TV6. Do you know when it will be out?
Spring 2019 is when it's scheduled to come out.
That's a long time away.
It feels like it, I know, but it'll be here before you know it.
That is true. That is true. I'll have to tell them that. Lauren, did you have another?
Well, just thinking about the Serpent King, which of the characters still speak to you?
They all do. All 3 of them do. They still live in my head, and I think about them a lot. It's why there's a cameo from the Serpent King in Goodbye Days. Those Serpent King characters pop up in one way or another in TV6 too. There's little hints to that world. There's connection, and the Goodbye Days characters do too. I like all my stories to be connected. Now, they're not a sequel by any means, or a companion novel really, but they take place in the same universe. So, for example, G.M. Pennington, the author who appears in The Serpent King, he exists in the world of TV6 too.
Have you been busy doing very many author visits or Skype visits?
Yes, this year's been very busy. I've had a pretty relaxed summer. Summer's always a little quieter for me, which is good. But in general, yeah, I stay pretty busy throughout the year.
So if schools could they contact you to do a Skype visit, or do you?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love to do school visits or Skype visits, either way. You can email me at Jeff Zentner, JEFFCENTNER @gmail.com. And we can talk about all that. But yeah, I love doing school visits. One of my favorite things to do.
Great. You talked about reading lots of YA books. Is there some great YA books that you've read lately that you recommend?
Ooh, ones I've read lately. My friend Angelo Cermelis has a book coming out soon called The Dangers of Blending In, which is a phenomenal book. My friend Randy Rebay has a book coming out soon called When the Shot Drops. That's fantastic. My friend Nick Stone has a book coming out soon called Dear Martin, which is a fantastic book. My friend Brittany Cavallaro has a book called The Light of August that came out this year. My friend Emily Henry has a book called A Million Junes that's fantastic. My friend Carrie Kletter has a book, The First Time She Drowned. I've read that one a long time ago, but it's one of my favorite YA books, so I always try to recommend it to people. So there are some very, very good books out there.
Lauren, do you have another question?
I just wanted to say I loved the part about how you dealt with Dill's depression and how Lydia really stuck by his side and didn't turn away and give up. That just really spoke to me a lot.
Oh, thank you.
What do kids say about that?
That they appreciate that they identify with what Dill felt and also with what Lydia felt as she was watching somebody dear to her struggling with this. And that's a very near and dear thing to me. I've struggled with depression, struggled with obsessive compulsive disorder and anxiety, and so issues of mental illness are certainly near and dear to my heart. And I try to depict them in my books and show them, as part of life, as something that you can survive and all of that.
I was very excited because Lydia was just like the cheerleader for Travis and Dill. You can do this. You can make something more. And her family was so supportive.
She really was. I appreciate people who like Lydia. And it's definitely not everybody who likes her. She's definitely the most controversial of the characters. Everyone loves Travis. Most people like Dill. But then Lydia is much more controversial. And I really appreciate the people who like her because I think she's a really wonderful person. And yes, she can be snobby and snotty, and she's not a perfect person by any means. But she really brings up the people around her. She really boosts them up and helps them to be their best selves.
And you need all those kinds. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, especially how her parents even stepped in and helped with Dill's decision to go to college. I thought that was cool how they all were really just rallying around her friends.
Yeah. Those parents were kind of my ideal parents. Like, that's who I want to be as a parent.
I was excited when Travis's mother came by. I was like, yes, you're getting out. You're getting out. Because I know that had to take so much strength and all that just to decide to leave.
She was a small character in the book, but I think a lot about her, and I think a lot about where she ended up and the kind of life she had, and I like to think a lot about her.
I always think, I hope she found somebody or found a great life when she left. That it was fun for her and she had joy finally.
I think she did. My belief is that if it's not on the page in the book, then it's open to interpretation, and your view of what happened to her is as valid as mine. But I think she ended up in a good place, doing good things and kind of living the life that she never got to lead. I imagine her trying new things like yoga and living near the ocean and just having a good life and finding a guy who's good to her, and because she's had enough challenges.
Did they cut anything from the book that you really wanted in the book?
No, they cut something from the book that I fought to have cut, which is very unusual. It's very unusual for an author to argue with their editor to cut something that they had originally put in. And it was an epilogue. And it was an epilogue to the Serpent King that really tied things up with a neat bow and went several years into the future and told you exactly how things turned out with Dill and Lydia and et cetera. And the more I sat with that epilogue, the more uncomfortable I became with it, that I was exerting so much control over those characters so far into the future. I felt like it wasn't my right to do that, and that I needed to leave that for the readers to do. And my editor really liked that epilogue, and I had to really argue with her to cut it. And so we kind of negotiated it, and she got me to write a different plot line that is in the Serpent King now. And so that plot line's there, but the epilogue is not.
Okay. Well, it was frustrating when I got to the end and thought, oh, they don't tell me how this all ends up, but I really liked how, as the reader, you get to kind of decide how their lives are going to end up.
Yeah. There are some hints in Goodbye Days as to how I think things ended up, at least a few years into the future. If you're really sharp and you really remember the clues I dropped in Serpent King, there are clues in Goodbye Days as to how things ended up.
So we'll have to go back and do some rereading, is what you're saying.
Got to go back and do some rereading.
I know it's around 2:30. You said you only had about 30 minutes. So are we close in time? Did you go on?
Yeah, it's about 2:30. So I should probably get going. I'm a prosecutor for the state of Tennessee in my day job. So I got to get back to getting the bad guys.
Yes. Well, that's a great job, and thank you for your service in doing that.
You're very welcome.
Thank you very much for your conversation, and I cannot wait till TV6 comes out. But I will reread these again, I know.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good to talk to you all.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.